Hello. So I am listening to Remarkably Bright Creatures. It's cold. It's cold. I'm listening to Remarkably Bright Creatures, and upon recommendation from my mother. And I've been seeing it I feel like I've seen it all over the place, and it was on like Spotify audiobooks, a whole bunch. It probably won a bunch of awards. Very popular. And I'm being the asshole that I am. I'm very skeptical of a lot of extremely popular books. I find that I'm just a critic. So I'm listening to it. I'm a little bit over halfway through, and I don't know. I don't love it. I think it's a really intriguing concept. I'm really fascinated by biology. I've been really into octopus and squids and deep sea creatures and just their thinking, their being, their all of it. So I think that they're really interesting. So I'm very intrigued by a book that kind of centers around or engages with this idea of sentience, especially within octopus, which are so extraordinarily intelligent, and when we kind of consider intelligence without sort of human benchmarks, how extraordinary they really are. So I'm really intrigued by it. I feel like the first 20% maybe was really compelling. I think that the writing is pretty good. And I think that kind of opening with the octopus, with Marcellus, I think is a really solid move. And I think that there's a lot of unknowns, especially in the first half with Tova, and with what happened with her son and her husband and her brother, and there's all of these kinds of distanced relationships and family that she doesn't have relationships with anymore. And so I was really intrigued how all of those would play out. I have not been particularly interested in Cam. In general, I think his opening chapter was a good move, I think, to make him, when he is visiting his Aunt Jean and helps her out because the whatever guy is you have to get rid of this plant, and he's no, she doesn't, I'm smart. So it's kind of painting him in a positive light, especially since after that he turns out to be such an asshole and is so mean to his girl, is just lying and shitty to his girlfriend, and gets kicked out, and is this self-pitying, just kind of a self-pitying piece of shit. I don't find him very interesting. I appreciate this, and I'm sure that's part of it, is it's he's a piece of shit, but then at the end of the novel, he turns out to become a good person or whatever. But I'm just I am personally not very interested in, especially straight cis men, being assholes. I just don't find that characteristic and then that character arc very interesting, very meaningful. I just have I'm just yeah, you're a piece of shit, congratulations, okay, yeah, you think that you don't deserve all of the negative consequences in your life because you had an absent mother, and who you think is he is just very, in kind of the way that he talks about her, is quite callous and cruel, which, like, to some extent I understand. Like, she left when he was young, and this feeling of abandonment, but I just, like, am not compelled by. And so his story has throughout, and like that the whole thing is that, like, he gets all these chances and gets tons of people to help him out, and people are just giving him money and helping him out and giving him favors, and he just is an asshole about it. He just doesn't appreciate it. He has no self-awareness, and he's 30. Like, I just don't care. At that point, I don't care. I don't care. What do you mean? Like, you think it's okay to lie to your girlfriend and then, like, not have a job and be late and then, like, blame everyone else. And this additional piece of, like, but he's so smart. Look at all these facts he knows. Like, look at all of, like, oh, when it comes out, I'm a nerd. I can't believe I came out as a nerd. Like, I just, fuck off. Fuck off. Fuck all the way off. I'm an asshole, but I'm actually really smart. I just have no, like, motivation, drive, self-awareness, compassion, empathy for others' experiences, consideration for, like, how my actions affect others. Like, I don't give a shit. Sure, like, I guess that exists and is a story to tell. I truly just do not care. So, he's just, like, a part of this. Tova, I feel like, has been more interesting, but at some point, I think when, like, she fell off and hurt herself and was just like, oh my goodness, oh gracious, like, that she doesn't curse at all, like, something about her feels false, feels incomplete, like, that it's just, like, almost similarly that there's this kind of self-pitying, and that she, I don't know, I go back and forth on, like, in a lot of ways I feel like the writing and the language and the characters have something kind of grounding in them, which I think is what's, like, pushed me to continue reading, and in her, like, knitting group, like, something about that feels, like, sincere. But there's also, it just, I'm not entirely convinced. In a lot of ways, they almost feel like caricatures, that she's this kind of, like, caricature of a, like, polite, grieving, isolated old woman who had this, like, lovely, perfect marriage and just the tragedy of her dead son. And that, like, has all these friends, but, like, I don't know, like, maybe similar, like, maybe I'm just, an asshole, and, like, can't appreciate, like, her perspective, or her experiences, or her perspective, but something about it, and it just feels, incomplete, and in some ways insincere. I think the choice to make Marcellus a, like, and look, part of this I think is also that I'm listening to it, and I do think it would be maybe a different experience if I were reading it, but I think the choice to make Marcellus this, like, kind of posh, distinguished, like, intellectual, kind of autistic man of, like, is interesting. I don't think it's wrong, but it almost feels kind of like a default of, like, well, if an octopus could talk, this is what he'd sound like. Something about it doesn't feel, like, Marcellus as a character, which is maybe unreasonable for me to think because he's an octopus, but feels kind of, like, uncritical, I guess. At least that's kind of how I'm sort of perceiving it right now. And not that, like, the point of view itself isn't nuanced. And, you know, kind of imagining what it would be to be, you know, such an intelligent creature that's isolated, and disconnected from the people that kind of go in and observe and are sort of watching you all the time without ever, you know, kind of engaging with you. Like, I think it's really interesting conceptually, and I don't think that the way that she chooses to write him is, like, inaccurate. Maybe I think I just wish that it felt that his character felt more intentional. I think also this could be like that the voice that reads it is a white man, so it comes off that way, and maybe if I were reading it on my own, I would kind of relate to sort of his experience in the dialogue differently. That's just kind of how there is something in listening to this book that pisses me off. I think that's what it is. And I haven't really figured out what it is yet. And I think I'm going to finish it. But I also think the choice of, like, that there is this kind of mystery surrounding her son's death and Pam's mom's disappearance. And Marcellus's, like, relationship to Eric in a way, and connection to Eric, I think is really interesting. And she being the author, kind of directs us towards this conclusion pretty early. I feel like at like 30 or 40% or so, it starts to become pretty clear that Tova is the biological grandmother of Cam. And so, which I guess is, like, interesting. But I think the choice to reveal that so early in the novel is interesting. Because it does kind of make me wonder, like, well, then what's left? Like, it's them figuring it out. And so I do kind of feel like the second half of this novel, I feel less incentivized to finish. I think partly because, like, what was driving it and making the story compelling was this sort of, like, piece of unknown. Because, honestly, I don't know that I find the characters themselves to be super compelling. Like, that's the piece of Tova feeling sort of like not a caricature. It almost feels like it's a kind of like what's the word for it, like they're the, like, off-brand people. It's like when you're on a Disney show and you can't have any, like, brands or like names of things, so everyone's just in, like, a red t-shirt and they're like, yeah, I'm going to the shop. Like, it does feel a little bit like that, which I guess in some way I understand, but that it does almost feel like a like they feel like characters. They don't necessarily feel like people, I think. Which is not necessarily, like, bad. I think is just less compelling to me. That it feels like I guess there's maybe, like, nuances that are being lost. And I don't know. And maybe I'm like, this is just my opinion. I think that's it. This is just my opinion. I think that their kind of characterizations is sort of falling very strictly within a kind of falling within certain boundaries. Maybe it's that they're They feel almost obvious, or like, I think it's that the whole thing, a lot of it is that it feels very white. And because it's taking place in like the Pacific Northwest, and I've lived there and I loved it. And so to some degree, I think I can kind of understand that. Like, it is a white culture. And I think that is part of it. And so maybe I'm just being hypercritical of like that they're just maybe less interesting stories to me, or maybe it's the way that she writes her characters that they're just less interesting. Like, I don't know what else to say. I don't know what else to say other than like, I just don't find Tova to be very interesting. And I'm not entirely convinced by her, like, kind of buttoned up, polite, always good, always kind, doesn't have like that. That could be just who she is. Could be who her character is. But it feels a little bit false, in the same way that Cam is like, here's a guy in his 30s and he's an asshole. like he manipulates women to get what he wants, and he lies, and it doesn't work very hard. But look at how smart he is. Like, here's the redeeming qualities of this guy that otherwise sucks. And then here's an old, sad woman. And here, like, I think in some ways it feels like maybe them as characters aren't particularly original. And maybe it's that lacking, like, specificity that makes them feel, because they don't feel necessarily two-dimensional. It is that they feel scripted, which is kind of a bizarre thing to say about a book, because it's written. Like, they are scripted, but I think that's where literature that I really connect with and that I really love, I think writes characters that feel like they're engaged in the world and that they're a part of the world. And Tova really doesn't feel that way. She feels, and I also think that, like, that could partly be intentional, that she feels kind of stuck in time, that she doesn't have a phone, and she does daily crosswords every day, and she doesn't curse. She does the same thing every day and doesn't change. Like, that maybe, like, that is the character, that is her, is someone that's stuck in time, with the grief of her son, and like that she hates everyone's gossip but she doesn't leave, feels very indicative of that it's just like, she is a woman stuck in a moment and stuck in time, and that is kind of almost feels like she's got kind of blinders on, I guess, like that she seems that she clearly feels very isolated and wants to be isolated, even though she isn't. She's not. Like, she has these friends. She has Ethan, who is another kind of like caricature of like, this is a Scot. He's got a Scottish accent. He says Scot things. Where I'm kind of like, okay. Again, like, I don't find heterosexual relationships very compelling. So I'm kind of like, whatever. And Cam and, like, it just, them as people, I don't care. I think I'm going to finish it. Because I'm kind of curious how she ends it. Especially with, like, that Marcellus is clearly dying. and how she chooses to conclude that, like how she wants to sort of resolve this, especially since this kind of like obvious conflict, mystery, question that a lot of Tova's life and Cam's life sort of centers around, which is Eric's disappearance, his mom's absence, and that we as readers know so early in the novel how, especially as Cam's like being there continues to center around finding a man who he thinks is his dad, who clearly isn't his dad, which also feels like some kind of cliche, like something that's like, what would a shitty guy do if he grew up without a dad? He's gonna find a rich guy and say, you're my dad, can you give me, like, he's an idiot. And I don't I don't have a lot of compassion for him. Like, I'm not a fan of being like, here's a really shitty person, but look how smart he is, as a kind of redeeming quality. Because I'm like, fuck you, lots of people are smart. You don't get to just be an asshole and be like, it's so hard, I'm so smart, and my life is so horrible. Like, whatever, okay? Get in line. Like, I just don't have a lot of sympathy for him. And I think in some way, like, so I don't know. I think I'm talking in circles. I think I'm saying the same thing, which is that, like, neither of them are very interesting to me. But I think I'll finish it because I'm curious how she concludes all of this and kind of how she decides to, what she as the author kind of wants me as a reader to glean from this story and from his character, like from their arcs, which are so obviously like, she's gonna find him and feel like there's purpose in her life, and that, you know, she can move on from her son's mysterious death, which I'm like, she doesn't have to do that. Whatever. And he's gonna learn to be less of a horrible person and to have responsibility. And I'm like, you're 30, bitch. It took this long. That's on you. Like, whatever. Do better. Do better. And that Marcel, so there is a kind of like, we know how this ends. And I feel like at least the kind of mystery inspired a sort of like compulsion to move forward in this story when the characters themselves don't have much to offer. So, I don't know. I guess I'll finish it. I'll see what I think after that. And it's another book. It's another one. And now I know. And this is why I'm such a critic of popular books. Because I feel like they lean towards, that's what it is. It feels bland. It's bland. It's bland. It's, how the hell can I not remember? What is the word for the opposite of like something that's a brand name? Is that it's, I'm not gonna get it. Generic. Jesus Christ. Oh my fucking God. Generic. The whole thing feels bland and generic. It feels a little bit like you took these kind of like, here's an old woman. What happened to her? Her son died. Yeah, she's Swedish. She had a happy marriage. She has an estranged brother that died. Like, maybe I'm just like too accustomed to more tragedy and trauma, and more depth, maybe, but they feel like they all feel kind of bland and generic, and I wish that there had been a little more, I guess specificity and distinction in them as characters, because it does with having kind of these bland characters, it feels like more of the attention is then drawn to what is the meaning or moral of this story, if you're using these almost like stand-in figures to kind of propel the real story that you want to tell, that's about this octopus, and about like human connection and human communication, and how we like lie to each other and disconnect and isolate ourselves, without really appreciating all of the ways that we can connect and grow, and all of the meaning, like all of the valuable relationships that we have the opportunity to kind of create and to nourish. And so I think Marcellus is this sort of foil to Tova and Cam's isolation and sort of struggling with identity and relationships. And I just wish that they, as people, felt more, not sympathetic necessarily, yeah, just more nuanced, more specific, more distinct as people. That the stories that they have to tell are something that feels more gripping. Which you get. So, I don't know, maybe I'll change my mind. Maybe I'm a hater. So we'll see. So far it's decent.